on, of course, this model too, because these will help. So I think these three models probably give us about everything we need. Okay, so just the ones that we can see off this, okay? So what we've got here would be the right ventricle pumping blood into the pulmonary trunk, and then the pulmonary trunk bifurcates or splits into the two pulmonary arteries. Of course, they're colored blue, even though they're arteries, because they carry blood that is low in oxygen. Anytime a blood vessel goes from the heart towards capillaries, it's always going to be an artery and arterial. So this is a blue-colored artery called the pulmonary trunk, and two blue-colored pulmonary arteries, 1, 2 each long. The blue-colored superior vena cava and the blue-colored inferior vena cava deliver blood into the right atrium. All right, then when the blood picks up oxygen, loses CO2 as it goes through the pulmonary capillaries, it drains back to the left atrium of the heart by way of the red-colored pulmonary veins. So you got a pair of red-colored pulmonary veins carrying richly oxygenated blood coming into the left atrium. The left atrium, unlike the right atrium, stretches across the back of the heart, and these would be the pair of red-colored pulmonary veins coming back from the right lung. So it's kind of weird because when you look behind the right ventricle, you see the two pulmonary veins emptying blood from the right lung into the left atrium. All right, the left ventricle pumps its blood into the aorta, and the aorta, as it comes out of the heart, arches around like this, and it actually arches behind the heart. And that's why it kind of disappears on this model, because the aorta comes up and then it arches behind the heart. Okay, the aorta, as it arches, forms what's called the aortic arch. And then the aorta is said to descend through the diaphragm into the abdominal cavity. There are three branches off the aorta. First is the brachiocephalic artery, and there's only one brachiocephalic in the arterial system, the brachiocephalic artery. The superior vena cava comes up, forms two brachiocephalic veins, right and left. But brachiocephalic artery, the brachiocephalic artery branches into a right subclavian and a right common carotid. And then the middle branch is the left common carotid, and then finally the left subclavian. So here's the right subclavian and the left subclavian, the right common carotid and the left common carotid. And this right here is the brachiocephalic. And the brachiocephalic comes up and forms the right subclavian artery and the right common carotid. So when you look up here, these would be the common carotids that you can see in the neck. And the common carotid comes up and splits to an external and an internal carotid. And you can see them right here on the side, on this torso, where the common carotid splits into an external that goes this way towards the face, and an internal carotid that actually goes more internally into the brain. Okay. When you take a look at these models, we just went over all the blood vessels associated with the heart. So let's pull the heart out. Rip my heart out. And now we'll be looking at the stuff that we can see. Okay. The superior vena cava is really the only thing that you see on, well, actually, I guess you see a little bit more of that, because there's the superior vena cava into the two brachiocephalics. And the two brachiocephalics become the superior vena cava. Okay, so this would be the superior vena cava that would lead into the right atrium of the heart. And the superior vena cava branches, okay, to become the two brachiocephalic veins. So the brachiocephalic veins form the superior vena cava. All right, a couple things I want you to know about the veins. Each brachiocephalic branches into a very large internal jugular and then a subclavian. So over here, this would be the brachiocephalic to a large internal jugular, and then the subclavian. And that's probably going to be it. The only other thing that I'd want to point out on this is that the artery that goes across the face is the facial artery. So I think I probably am touching on all the arteries that are listed here on exercise 32, okay? And then I'll point out some of the veins as well. So let's get back to arteries. The aorta arches back behind the heart, then goes behind the heart and through the diaphragm. And the diaphragm forms a perfect seal around the aorta and the inferior vena cava and the esophagus. There's several tubes that go through the diaphragm. So this part of the, you have the aortic arch and then the thoracic aorta. And then when it goes through the diaphragm, it becomes the abdominal aorta. Because the aorta, if you're standing up in the anatomical position, seems to arch around and then descend all the way down, sometimes it's referred to as the descending aorta. So the aorta comes out of the heart, and it ascends, and then forms an arch, and then it descends. Okay, and the descending aorta has the thoracic portion and the abdominal portion. All right, there's 3 blood vessels that come off the midline of the aorta. So does anybody have that diagram? Can I borrow that real quick? Thanks, bud. Okay, so this will say major arteries at the top. This one says major veins. But let's look at major arteries. Okay, here's the diaphragm. And when you come below the diaphragm, coming right off the middle of the aorta, are 3 arteries. The celiac, superior mesenteric, and the inferior mesenteric. So let's check these out. Most of the models have 2 of those 3. So all of the models have the celiac trunk. So here's the diaphragm, and right below the diaphragm, the first blood vessel right here, coming off the midline of the aorta, is the celiac trunk. And then the next one right here is the superior mesenteric. Some of the models, but not all, and this is an example of one that doesn't have this third one, but I still want you to know it because often it's been circled in. As you see the little circle there that's been literally written in there in ink. But this would be the inferior mesenteric. So 1, 2, 3. Blood vessels coming off the midline of the aorta. 1, just under the diaphragm, celiac trunk. 2, superior mesenteric. And 3, circled in here with ink on some models but not all, is the inferior mesenteric. The vein and artery that goes to the kidney would be the renal artery and vein. That's the adrenal gland. So you can see the adrenal vein going up to the adrenal gland. And I really don't see a counterpart for an artery. Okay, these would be the gonads down below. And these blood vessels coming right off here. Okay, you can see blood vessels that come down like this, and they'll actually end up, in this case, going to the ovaries, because this is a female insect. So this would be an ovarian artery and vein. But it's okay to just say gonadal, because gonadal works for both sexes. That's a sexless term. So in this case, this is always a gonadal artery, but in a girl, the gonadal artery is also called the ovarian artery. And in a guy, the gonadal artery, which is an okay name because it works for both sexes, would be called a testicular artery. So I guess if I showed you this artery with this model, you could say either ovarian artery or gonadal artery, and you're going to be just fine. If you just say gonadal artery for both sexes, you're always going to be right. All right, the abdominal aorta stops right there. And you always give new names at branch points. So as soon as you get to the bottom of the aorta, that's where it branches. And it's going to branch into 2 common iliacs. And then the common iliacs, you trace it down like this, and right here is where the common iliacs branch. And where you have a branch point, you get new names. And at that branch point, there's going to be the external iliac, more externally located towards the skin. And then deeper down, and you can kind of see it from the side here, you can see the internal iliac. Okay, it's going to be easy to see once you look close. All right, with the veins. The inferior vena cava runs alongside of the aorta, and the inferior vena cava goes through the diaphragm and then up into the right atrium. The inferior vena cava also runs through the liver. So it looks like there's a stretch of it that's been cut out, but it hasn't been cut out. It would be running through the liver. So this large blue vein that runs through the liver is the section of the inferior vena cava that has been pulled out along with the liver. Another name for the liver is hepatic. And a lot of stuff associated with the liver has the word hepatic in it. And that's the hepatic vein. Okay. The inferior vena cava has renal veins, to the kidneys, gonadal veins, to the gonads, ovaries and testes, depending on the sex. And in general, veins and arteries carry the same name. So you come down here, the aorta branches into two common iliacs. The inferior vena cava branches into two common iliacs. The common iliac artery branches into an external and internal iliac artery, and the common iliac vein does the same thing. So everything in here kind of parallels itself. Renal artery, renal vein, gonadal artery, gonadal vein, common iliac arteries and veins, external iliac, internal iliac arteries and veins, kind of the same thing. Okay, so that makes that kind of easy. There isn't any corollary to the celiac, superior mesenteric and inferior mesenteric, coming off the inferior vena cava. Those blood vessels are just arteries off the aorta. All right, I think that probably does it for... We'll never find the external jugulars. They're really small, and we just don't see them on these models. But this big one here would be the internal jugular, okay? And that could be a little confusing. Okay. Actually, here's an external jugular right there. Let's go to the extremities. So there are